Today, we will consider the presidency of Andrew Jackson, the first Western U.S. president. It was a time when democracy was changing, and while more people were voting and getting involved, there was still a large portion of the country that was left out of the democratic spirit of the day. It's the Jacksonian Era. The Democratic Republicans could not settle on a candidate in 1824, and 4 individuals ended up running for president. John Quincy Adams, who was the son of second President John Adams, Andrew Jackson, the hero from the Battle of New Orleans during the War of 1812, William Crawford, who served as both Secretary of War and later Secretary of State, and Henry Clay, who we remember as a leader in the House of Representatives who came up with the American system. The Federalists were no longer an existing party by the time we get to the election of 1824. The Federalists will be replaced over time by other parties like the Whigs and the Know-Nothings, who will emerge as challengers to the Democratic Party. When we look at the map for the election of 1824, we see that Andrew Jackson won both the popular vote and the Electoral College. But the Constitution says that one must win a majority in the Electoral College, which Jackson failed to accomplish. And according to the 12th Amendment, the election would then go to the House of Representatives, where the House would vote. There, John Quincy Adams received support from Henry Clay, who in turn was selected as Adams's Secretary of State. Jackson claimed that there was a corrupt bargain between both Adams and Clay, and he would spend the next 4 years preparing for his rematch with John Quincy Adams. What we see during this time period was an expansion of American democracy. The first thing we see is the adoption of universal white male suffrage. What this means is that all white males could vote. States dropped requirements like you having to be a member of a specific church, or you have to own a certain amount of property in order to vote. What this does is it involves more people in the political process. The second thing we see is the creation of party nominating conventions, which gave more power to the electorate. Instead of a handful of party leaders selecting candidates, all party members get together to elect candidates for each party. What this does, again, is it puts more power in the hands of more people. And we still see these conventions today every 4 years, right before presidential elections. The Democrats and the Republicans get together and have these big conventions right before the election. We also see an increase in the number of elected officials versus appointed officials. This prevented party leaders from appointing their friends and supporters to high office for extended periods of time. It makes people in office accountable to the people who elect them. And again, giving more power to the people. If we take all of these things together, they bring more people into the political process. But these changes were not for everyone. White males were now engaged in the political process, but women, Native Americans, and African Americans would have to wait a while before being asked to participate in the American political system. These changes to American democracy had a major impact on the election of 1828, when Adams and Jackson ran against each other without anyone else in the race. When they ran 4 years earlier, 350,000 individuals voted. And in 1828, more than 1 million people voted because of the changes that we talked about just a minute ago. These new voters helped elect Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States. In this campaign, we saw the candidates appeal to the sectional interests of voters, no different than candidates today who say one thing in front of one group and something else in front of a different group in order to gain their support. This election also shows a shift away from the East Coast, where the first 6 presidents came from Virginia and Massachusetts, to the West. And for those who think that dirty campaigning and attack ads is a new phenomenon in American politics, I would offer the election of 1828, where both candidates spent more time focusing on character attacks than on actual issues. The Adams campaign characterized Jackson as an adulterer, even attacking his wife. One person said, "Ought a convicted adulteress and her paramour husband be placed in the highest office of this free and Christian land?" This dealt with the issue over whether Andrew Jackson's wife was actually divorced before they got married. The Jackson campaign claimed that Adams had offered an American servant girl to the Tsar of Russia while serving as the minister to that country. And again, dirty tricks, mudslinging is not something new in politics. We can trace this all the way back to the election of 1800. Jackson was very popular when he took office in 1829. Nicknamed Old Hickory for his toughness, Jackson was known for the many duels he had taken part in. He was captured by the British during the Revolutionary War as a teenager. He was the hero of the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812, and fought against the Seminole in the First Seminole War in Florida before running for president in 1824. The people believed he was one of them. He captured the democratic spirit of the time that was part of the expansion of democracy I mentioned earlier. Upon his inauguration, the people flooded to the White House to meet Jackson. Jackson established himself as a man of the people, fighting for the common man against the powerful aristocracy who ran American politics. And while claiming to fight for this common man, Jackson was a wealthy slave owner from Tennessee, making him the first Western president. In office, Jackson expanded the spoils system, which is where parties reward their political allies with government jobs and positions, not based on ability, but based on loyalty. And what Jackson did was he basically gave his Democratic friends high-ranking positions for their support during the campaign. Jackson also believed in rotating more people through office. Jackson claimed this was a way to prevent corruption in government, but his critics said that this allowed him to provide more jobs to his Democratic allies. Another thing with Jackson is the nullification crisis, which dealt with South Carolina's challenge to the constitutionality of the Tariff of 1832. We'll cover the details of the nullification crisis in our next unit. The National Bank was viewed as a tool of the wealthy, not the common man, after the Panic of 1819, which was an economic downturn that resulted from land speculation and bad loans offered by the banks to the people. Jackson was not a fan of the National Bank and took on Nicholas Biddle, the bank's president. The president claimed that the bank was unconstitutional and vetoed the bill that was to recharter the National Bank. Jackson proceeded to pull all money out of the National Bank and placed federal money in state banks of his choosing. Jackson's actions increased inflation and led to a major economic depression known as the Panic of 1837. Many banks failed and unemployment hit record highs as a result of Jackson's bank veto. The expansion of democracy did not extend to Native Americans, who were viewed by many Americans as impediments to westward expansion. Jackson believed that the government should give Native Americans new lands west of the Mississippi River. In 1830, the Congress passed the Indian Removal Act, which ultimately led to the relocations of thousands of native tribes from their ancestral homelands. In a letter to the Creek tribe, Jackson wrote, "Friends and brothers, listen. Where you now are, you and my white children are too near to each other to live in harmony and peace. Beyond the great river Mississippi, where a part of your nation has gone, your father has provided a country large enough for all of you, and he advises you to remove to it." Again, Andrew Jackson taking on the paternal role of father, talking down to the Native Americans, and basically saying that it is time for them to go. Most would go, but some would resist. The Cherokee, who had attempted to assimilate into American culture by drafting a constitution, educating their children like Americans, adopting American agriculture, some even owning slaves, challenged the removal order in court. And they were successful in the Worcester versus Georgia case, where John Marshall, still the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, ruled that the government could not force the Cherokee to move. This set up a clash between state and federal law, and Georgia and the government basically ignored the court. The quote from Jackson, "John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. Build a fire under them. When it gets hot enough, they'll go." This quote from Jackson sets the tone of the day with regard to the way the government viewed Native Americans. Let's close the show by looking at the Trail of Tears, which marked the end of the Cherokee Resistance in 1838. The Cherokee were rounded up, placed in camps, their homes and properties were destroyed, and their ancestral homelands, which had been their families' homes for generations, were given away to white settlers in a lottery. Then 15,000 Cherokee were forced to march from Georgia to present-day Oklahoma, where 4,000 died on the forced march of starvation, disease, exhaustion, and some were even murdered. The map shows just how far these individuals had to go. And to quote one soldier, "Future generations will read and condemn the act, and I do hope posterity will remember that private soldiers like myself and like the 4 Cherokees who were forced by General Scott to shoot an Indian chief and his children had to execute the orders of our superiors. We had no choice in the matter." A second witness claimed that, "I fought through the Civil War and have seen men shot to pieces and slaughtered by the thousands, but the Cherokee removal was the cruelest work I ever saw." Here, an individual is saying that the Trail of Tears, not the bloody Civil War, was the cruelest thing he ever saw. The treatment of Native Americans will not change going forward. The conflict is the same that it was when the New Englanders destroyed the Pequot Nation in 1637, the thirst for land, which will only increase as we progress through the American story. We will start our journey towards that Civil War next time, and until then, good night, Albuquerque.